Okay. Um, Welcome back. Uh, it was such a, you know, our hearts were really ripped by that film. The next part of our program after that film showing will be we have two panel. We have two reactors, and maybe call them then now. The first speaker is Patrick Campos, a film scholar, programmer, and associate professor at the University of the Philippines Film Institute, where he recently served as director. He is the author of The End of National Cinema, Filipino Film at the Turn of the Century in 2016, co-author of Scenes Reclaimed 2020, and editor of Pelicula, a journal of Philippine cinema. Along with regional cinema specialists, he co-organizes the roving Biennial Association of Southeast Asian Cinemas Conference, and in Manila, he programs the annual Tingin ASEAN Film Festival. He is a member of NetPAC. May we now call on Mr. Campos?
So Patrick just got vaccinated, so he's not feeling well, but he sent
Oh,
his recorded reaction, and I'm going to share the screen. Thank you.
okay. Okay. Thank you, Claire.
Um, Good evening, everyone. I am very sorry that I cannot join you in person or synchronously, but I'd like to be able to share my thoughts on the film A House in Pieces and what I think its contributions and achievements are. Um, so allow me, please, to share my commentary on the film. At the center of Jean Claire D. and Manuel Domis's heartbreaking documentary, A House in Pieces, is the idea of home expressed and embodied in different but all of them painful ways. As ruins of a city in the present, spaces of residents deserted. As a longed for past cradling one's memories that is yet within arm's length, not so distant but irretrievably lost. And as defiant hope for a future shadowed by uncertainty. The idea is signified symbolically and ironically in the film's opening sequence. We hear chanting and read lines from Darangen, the 14th century Maranao epic, over an image of a minaret peeking behind the mist. The evocative epigraph speaks of a deep Islamic history dating back hundreds of years before the Spanish colonial period, an atavistic home that must always be relived but cannot be repeated in time, though it is ever present in the Muslims' daily prayers. It is a dreamy image, teased by the mundane presence of power lines and steel frames jutting in the foreground, reminding us where we are. Then we meet Usopp, speaking about his homing pigeons, birds that can be domesticated even in unseemly places as long as, he says, they are well treated. Interwoven by editing, we behold the birds as they fly freely over the ruins of Marawi City, a far cry from the enchanting cityscape that once was. Even I, as an outsider who has only visited Marawi once in 2015 and realizing that the visit can never happen again, can feel a sense of loss and a sharp pang of sorrow as I behold through the documentary structures reduced to rubbles, buildings riddled with bullet holes. How much more the people whose lives were uprooted and whose homes leveled. This sense of witnessing the phantom homes evoked so hauntingly in A House in Pieces is what sets D. and Domis's film apart from documentaries produced during and after the Marawi siege, which, though informative, tend to revel in televisuality of explosions and devastation, and though featuring first-hand accounts of soldiers and civilians, exhibit the propensity to be businesslike and to make their subjects appear obligatorily like helpless sufferers. Such documentaries may be very useful in analyzing the cold facts of the war and its aftermath. However, their inclination to amplify the sense of Marawi's distance and its people's victimhood is precisely the tendency that has kept non Muslim Filipinos from truly understanding and empathizing with their Muslim brethren. A House in Pieces humanizes and dignifies their subjects, showing their perseverance, their labor of making meaning out of the tragedy, and their profound understanding of their situation. The ill tendency of conventional broadcast documentaries is what the filmmakers surmount, I surmise, because of the advantage of there being an insider and outsider. D is a Mindanaoan filmmaker and writer who has worked in but has also lived away from Mindanao. And Domes is a German artist and peace consultant who has done work in Mindanao for an international NGO. Apart from these subject positions, the years they have spent shooting the documentary, which investigative journalists do not have the luxury of having sometimes, allowed them to witness the experiences of their subjects on the ground in all their messy dailiness. The film is also able to document across 2 or 3 years how futile it all feels to wait on the government. The filmmaker's relatively long time of production is emblematized by the unhurried pace of the documentary and the impressionistic visual rendering of the surroundings, the human made disaster enveloped by nature's indiscriminate beauty. The subjects whose lives the filmmakers feature illustrate how suffering is variously lived out. The couple Yusuf and Farhana, with their children, who were relatively marginalized before the siege, found themselves saved from being situated in the periphery of the city center, which turned out to be ground zero of the urban warfare. From a distance, they could hear the carnage. They were gripped with fear, but they survived and are now returning home. In their seemingly provisional existence are nurtured spontaneous lullabies of grief that Farhana sings to her child as she stares in the distance, and oral tales of the war and its environs, its dogs and snakes and tanks and jets overhead that only those near enough to witness but far enough not to get hit could vividly retell. Nancy, who lived a more comfortable life before the siege, has lost much, and we feel her loss when she returns to the concrete edifice that she used to call home. Now she lives more modestly in an evacuation unit without the means to make her own living. However, more than the loss of property is being separated from her family, while her children eke out a living in Manila for all of them to survive, that hurts her the most. Alone, all heartbreak songs are her own sad love songs. There's the faceless driver, Abdul, who seems unsettled and not at all at home, chauffeuring the filmmakers in and out and around Marawi. Like an eschatologist, he philosophizes and offers reasons why such a tragedy befell the Maranaos. His words are not a social scientific treatise, though they sound measured. They are, though, a revelation of habits of thinking and homegrown turns of thought. Perhaps the most terrifying subject, shot in nondescript space, is that of the fatalist Maute fighter, soft-spoken and thin-framed Usman, whose son he proudly lost to martyrdom. He is remorseless because his cause is holy. He declares with confidence that just as sure as he and his son had learned to carry guns in their youth and wage the war together, so will fighters in hiding rise again. These subjects speak of figurative and literal homes, destroyed domiciles, families one must sacrifice for, communities displaced and communities formed around evacuation centers, kinfolk rueing how their fellow Muslims and fellow Maranaos could hurt them so, and the universal congregation that radical ideologues believe surpass one's blood. It is often mentioned because it is true that before the siege, Marawi was a vibrant Islamic city. That it was is its irresistible attraction from the viewpoint of difference from the majority population beyond Marawi, and similarity with certain neighboring Southeast Asian islands in proximity. However, what the House in Pieces offers is a picture not of a lively city, but that of a limbo, a powerful metaphor for the situation of Marawi and the troubles that beset portions of Muslim Mindanao. This suspended or postponed existence corresponds to and explicates Marawi's negative form of islandness, separated, isolated, neglected, an existence complicated by the jihadist sense of holiness, of being set apart. Whereas this urban island has been positively identified as belonging to a host of multicultures, especially in benign forms of cultural celebrations, The seduction of extremism for a disenchanted section of the populace negatively identifies a space as being externally alienated, precisely the pervading sense of being trapped in ceaseless misery that a house in pieces evokes. It is very telling that the strategy to establish an ISIS stronghold in Southeast Asia is centered on Muslim Mindanao's introverted enclaves, the domestication of extremist ideology in Marawi's interior, based on the idea of disciplinary and sacrificial purity and the exclusion of the outsider, reveals a negative island, a political void harnessed as a strategic focal point for deterritorialized power. Political and economic disenfranchisement and cultural marginalization at home front impel some Muslims to turn to violent fundamentalism, not to mention that many of them get paid to join the fight. Lest we think that the state is a mere observer in this conflict brought about by local and transnational forces, A House in Pieces is the evidence that this sort of picture cannot be accurate. The film takes its place alongside documentaries produced in the last 5 years about the violence wrought upon the Lumads, the barbarity of the drug war, the suppression of the free press, and the undeniable human rights violations perpetrated during the presidency of Duterte. As the state fumbles the rebuilding of Marawi, as it marginalizes Maranaos in the process of the city's rehabilitation and treats the process as a business opportunity, as it makes the people on the ground feel lost and forgotten, we can gain a sense of how negative islands are formed and how radicalization is nurtured by neglect. It is in this context that we must listen closely to the people on the ground, as the film allows us to do. For Usman and other soldiers whose hunger is spiritually and materially fed by joining the army, the jihad is unstoppable. For Abdul, the returning conflict is the failure of the kind and brave Maranao to transcend its interiority in the name of peace. And for Farhana, if extremists strike again, there will no longer be any reason to flee and leave one's home again, but every reason to strike back. As far as Usman, Abdul, and Farhana are concerned, as the documentary brilliantly captures their mindset, if Marawi's state of negative islandness, its insularity, and the howling neglect it has had to suffer before and after the war are not reversed and reoriented toward the flow of many islands, then, as A House in Pieces testifies, we must tremble for the future. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Mr. Campos. It was really a very insightful look at the film. And before we continue, I would like to remind that this screening um, is organized by the Stories Beyond and Mindanews, the organization that's celebrating its 20th anniversary today. No? And today is also the Marawi siege. Today marks the fourth year of the Marawi siege. Now we go to our next reactor, Yasmira Moner, an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science in the MSU-Iligan Institute of Technology and concurrently the acting director of the Institute for Peace and Development of the university. She earned her master's degree in governmental studies at the Universitas Muhammadiyah, Yogyakarta. Her research interests include conflict and peace studies, post conflict governance, and gender peace and security. She authored articles on social accountability and community peace building in the context of the Bangsamoro. As the OIC of MSU IIT IPDM, she works with civil society organizations and international development toward building a critical mass of peace constituency in Mindanao and the promotion of transparent, accountable, and participatory governance in the country. Let's all welcome Ma'am Moner.
Thank you so much, Ma'am
Yes,
Amalia.
ma'am.
Ma'am Ami, and happy anniversary to Mindanews. I've
Thank
been
you
reading
very much.
Mindanews. It has a very good, grounded stories. Um, on behalf of the peace champions and advocates who are actually we have commemorated and of course no have continuously discuss about this very relevant conversation that we have now. Thank you so much for inviting me here. Assalamualaikum, and at the outset, I would like to extend my heartfelt congratulations to the directors, Manuel Gomez and Jen Clear D, for this very compelling narrative. I think, disclaimer, as a Maranao, I really feel emotional about the film. I think what you have just told us is something that fills in the void that so much has been told about what happened to Marawi. And sadly, it has the common narrative of state-centric and the dominant narrative that, you know, this happened to Marawi because Maranao people allowed it to happen. But with the film, it has humanized, is what had been mentioned by Patrick, with his very beautiful, with his very compelling reaction about how the Marawi siege, how this film has humanized that very fateful tragedy that is the siege, no, and that it really, I think, the opening of the film with the pigeons, I think that's really very metaphorical in a sense, you know, like because the clamor of the Maranaos really is to come home. The issue of Marawi siege and post siege rehabilitation is a human right issue. Their fundamental right to come home and be treated with equal respect as fellow Filipino citizens. And that is, it has puzzled all of us, you know, as in the peace building community, on why they are not even allowed to see their homes. I think this is the tragedy that what happened to Marawi is telling of how we've been working for 4 decades of politically negotiated agreement, but the narrative of exclusion and othering is still very much felt because of how the Marawi IDPs are being treated. And significantly, that perception against Muslim Filipinos who are Filipino citizens themselves. Um, I think what has been laid out in the film is telling of the complexity of the post-conflict environment. It is in the film where you can see the importance of looking into the social structure in order to understand the complexity of the Bangsamoro peace process. Indeed, you have to understand how we value the family as our, you know, our political decision starts with the family, and I have to commend the directors for really showing that, you know, the importance of family. Like, we don't decide merely as individuals. They also like how, for example, in the film, Farhana was given her agency. Like, you know, while she was doing that carpentry work, that women, that Marana women also has that influence over their society. Because as a Marana woman, I know that myself. Secondly, is that the film is also a very good material, you know, because I think I'm looking into the film's potential to be a material for peace education. Part of the greater Bangsamoro peace process is the normalization track, and sadly, one of the least gaining traction is on the transitional justice. There's not even a proposal in the House for that transitional justice commission to take place. And because the film is something that moves individuals to the core, being able to understand how our religion is not just a private practice. Like, our religion is also very much part of our politics, of our everyday economic activity, of our social, how do you call this? Our everyday narrative of building our lives together as a people. And that Maranao is very, very much sentimental people. Like, I guess probably because of our location, our topography, like we're people of the lake. Like, you know, the lake is not just a source of economic activity. It's not just for us. It's not just about, you know, earning from the lake, but it's very much part of our identity as a people. And so we felt for that, when the government would say that, we're going to build Marawi like Dubai or something. I think, just, and I feel for my fellow Maranaos, like we don't basically need an imposition of a project of all this ornamentalized so-called projects that is very much imposed on us, and not something that is not reflective of our culture and of what we really need right now, is that sense of personal security, that they can go back to their home, just like that pigeon, like, we are all pilgrims, but we always are rooted on our home, and that's our sense of security. What I also like about the film is that it has basically opened up a conversation that is beyond the very divisive political narrative, and also the highly securitized discourse about Marawi siege. Like, it has opened up to understanding the social issues as well. I think there has been the mention there somewhere in the film about social conflicts. Well, we all know about the issue of Rido, and I think that is one of the layers of conflict that is exacerbated because people are displaced, and because former enemies have to come, have to be in the same community. But on the other hand, this is also something that Marinaos themselves have to also discern about the issue of social justice, and the issue of being able to come together and resolve this social this interethnic divide that basically makes rebuilding their lives together difficult. And lastly, and I think I have what I have really realized while watching the film is that I hope that um, this film will be available for everyone to watch and see that, what happened in Marawi is something that could happen again if we do not basically understand the different layers of the conflict. Like, I think the interview with a jihadist, with the former ISIS fighter, is some sort of a how do you call this, like a continuing, it's a contestation. I mean, this conversation has to continue. Like, I'm looking forward for like a sequel of the documentary where, following the lives of because I think that's also very important. I don't That community reintegration has to take place. I know that there has been a national action plan for PCVE, for example, but I don't, like, to be honest, it's not really whole of society approach. Like, it's still very much securitized and all that. So this film would somehow, it's like putting everyone on the same footing, that, hey, this is not just going to happen in Marawi, but it could still happen in the rest of the country if the government will not going to basically listen to the voices of those who are basically felt like they are dehumanized, or that they are being treated as enemies, or like they are not being taken into the mainstream society just because they are different, or that they basically do not fit in, to the mainstream culture. And so I guess that has been for me, it's also kind of a discernment, because I think as a political science, I have my bias towards the institutions, like, looking at how the rules work and all these things. But the film somehow has pushed me to also unlearn, and transcend, and look into the informalities of power, because we really have to nurture the conversation, and we really have to put back the power into the community where it belongs, so that we could really truly understand how can we rebuild Marawi together. So thank you so much, and once again, assalamualaikum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you
Yeah.
unmute yourself?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Yasmira, for providing context and deepening our understanding of the film. We have questions here, and I'm going to read it to all of you. From Leo UP Diliman, since this film is 2 years in the making, was there any change? Were there any changes in the course of the film's production in terms of intention or approach, of what story to tell, of whose story to tell, or how such a story should be told? Things like that.
Hmm.
I think to the directors, yeah.
Okay. Well, when we first started shooting the film, we really wanted to tell the stories of the displaced, the internally displaced people caused by the siege. Um, because like as someone, and this is, I have to say that I am so happy that Mindanews collaborated with us today to have this screening. I was part of Mindanews, and that's where I was taught to look at the conflict and different angles. And one of that is to look at the narratives of people who are displaced. So that was the original intention, really, to go into the evacuation centers in Iligan and find a protagonist, find a compelling story. Initially, we wanted to include the Torogan puzzle, the Torogan as a symbol for the, that's why it was called a house in pieces. So we wanted to use the symbol of the Torogan because there was a social enterprise that used the Torogan puzzles to help the children in the evacuation centers in psychosocial activities. But then we scrapped the idea of the Torogan puzzle, and we just continued to follow the family of Yusuf and Farhana. So basically, we just the film just evolved along the way as we shot in throughout the 2 years. We through Farhana we met other through our research we met the other protagonists. Manuel, do you want to add?
I'll take the next question from
Okay,
Cecilia,
sure.
and then I think for the next questions from the audience, since we have like maybe 15, 20 minutes left, the best is if
Okay.
people just
Yeah.
unmute themselves and ask.
Or maybe ask questions to the reactors because Patrick Campos is here.
Exactly. We're
Yes,
both. We have to.
Patrick Campos is here. Okay, so yeah. So you will
Sige.
answer Cecilia Jimenez question,
Sige, yeah.
or I'll read it. So okay,
yeah.
you answer.
So Cecilia
ahead,
Jimenez
Miguel.
asked if there's intentions from our sides in terms of further using the film and disseminating it and using it in peace building and transitional justice advocacy. So for me, this very much ties to the two great reactions we had, and I'd like to thank Patrick and Yasmira for joining us today. Because I think it's like we've had quite a few showings by now at film festivals, and we've also had a few sessions like this, which were organized together with an international organization with exactly that intention in terms of bringing the Marawi discourse further out, advancing it, formulating questions, controversies, possible ways forward. And this is something that we would very much like to do, and for which we are also very much looking forward to partnering with organizations in the future, because like Yasmira said, like those conversations need to happen. And I think this relates to the next question in the chat in terms of the boundaries between action and apathy. Our sense when we were in Marawi was often that people are really in this state of limbo still after like the whole time that we were shooting there. And it kind of has that feeling of you don't know if things are moving, where they're moving. And like Patrick also said in his reaction, this sense of limbo-ness, this limbo state is also how we chose to end the film, because the question is clearly not resolved. The problem is not being addressed. And we have definitely noticed that the conversations about the film in terms of the memorialization of what happened in Marawi, and in terms of giving recognition to the stories of the people who have suffered from this or who have been involved in this, are such an important part of Philippine history and politics that we would very much like to work with this. Yes, and I'm glad that Yasmira also said that like she sees this being used in peace education from a perspective of really also showing, these are voices and stories that are out there and that need to be acknowledged, and that we need to find ways of dealing with.
Yes,
Okay.
we're trying to also, as Manuel said, we're trying to also partner with universities, so so we could continue distributing the film, and basically organize screenings with students, because they're also a target the target audience for this.
Yeah. Okay, so we're trying to open the floor. If you want to have questions to our directors and to the reactors, you can unmute yourself and ask your question if you are willing.
Um, Ami, there's a question here from Georgi.
Okay. Okay. Go
Mm,
ahead.
uh, what is for you the boundary between resilience and apathy in the characters? Is there such a boundary? How long can resilience last before patience will stop for some? I find it remarkable how Farhana, Abdul, etc. just keep moving without a clear end in sight. What do you think about this, Patrick?
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, it's the same question I had really. On one hand, it seems amazing that these people can be so resilient, but at the same time, yeah, I see it as a kind of really scary. I find it a form of, as I termed it in my reaction, how negative violence are formed. In a way, we're barricading people within certain experiences that might blow up, and this is really what I felt. There is hope in the story of the people, but at the end of it, I feel that if nothing drastic changes, then there's really something to be scared about. Because in the first place, I think even this war was, I don't know, you have to correct my understanding if I'm wrong, but had something to do with this kind of past as well, right? I mean, this question of Georgie has to do with how long will they be resilient? And I think part of the reason of this war is that this resilience is being put to the test, because how long, right? And therefore, post-war, it's still the same question. And really, I think the filmmakers were um, made a great decision, and I really wonder how they got their subject, the Maute fighter, no, to get to speak. But hearing that person speak about that this will continue really puts it in proper context. That the post-war is not just rebuilding concrete things like houses, but also rebuilding lives so that these things never happen again. So maybe as also a question to the filmmakers, how did you get to interview the Maute fighter, and at what point in the process did you find him and get him to agree? Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, this was
okay,
There.
okay.
okay.
Ako?
Well,
I
yeah,
think Manuel. Go
okay.
ahead,
Go
Manuel.
ahead, Manuel.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, as you know by now, like we've shot this film over quite a long time, over 2 or 3 years, no, like mga ganon. And a lot of this was kind of building connections over time. So that's how quite late in our shooting, I think during the last shoot, so that was middle of 2019, we managed to get the connection to interview the former motive fighter. And this was always a question for us, like, how do we put him in the film? It's so important to have him in there. At the same time, it's different from the rest of the film. But we already knew that the ending, this kind of, we don't know what's going to happen, but we're afraid that there will be another war. That would really be our ending. And at some point, we also felt we're not doing justice to the story and to the protagonist if we don't also show that their fear is real, that there is really this voice out there which says that the fight may continue at any point and that they will be thrown back into the state of insecurity. So pero that was one of the most difficult editing decisions that we had to take in the process of making the film. Where and how do we work with this interview, Claire?
I mean it took a while for us to find the motive fighter. Rest assured, we followed protocols to make sure that his identity won't be revealed. There's so many things, layers to his security. But initially, it was really the plan was to go to Butig actually,
Wow.
but we got detained, and thankfully with my connections with Mindanews, war reporter, longtime war reporter, Carol Ergulias and Fuelan Brillardo helped us so we could leave. So it was a series of negotiations, and we finally found the person. So just like Manuel said, we really wanted to make sure that we treated the narrative in with so much sensitivity.
Yeah, we have another question here from May Caralde. Just today, yeah, this morning, we read news about Marawi residents held by authorities when they just want to visit their relatives who died in the siege. While you focused mainly on those who continue living, how do you think the notion of death and martyrdom factor in the future of Marawi or Mindanao as a whole?
That would be a good question for us, Yasmira.
Yeah,
I
was
think
put this way.
yes. Yasmira, you're still around?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm
Yes.
here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. What was that question about?
Hey, May.
Yeah.
The one of the visiting their
Okay.
relatives,
Yeah.
their dead relatives. He said, while the film focused on those who continue living, how do you think the notion of death and martyrdom factor is in the future of Marawi or Mindanao as a whole?
Hmm. You know, this is, I think, a difficult question considering that, yeah, it has some ideological implications in it. I think, yeah, because
Mhm.
when you talk about martyrdom, it's very subjective, right? It's something that's part of the faith of people. And there's really that kind of narrative. I mean, like look at now, there's Palestine issue. I think, and this is what I really fear about. I've been nudging friends and colleagues, like probably we're really so into the Palestinian cause, and it's always good to stand in solidarity with them. But let's also be mindful that there could be an unnecessary spillover, and that this is another way wherein the extremist narrative, the violent extremist narrative, can actually be exploited in a very, very precarious peace and security situation in the Bangsamoro. That they might conflate, the issue, even though we have a very, very difficult context. Of course, they would say that we're fighting on the issue of national right to self determination, but the context is really, really different. So I think one way of engaging, I mean, I don't know if I'll be able to answer that, but when we speak about personal convictions, or like issue of faith and resilience, I think one way of meeting halfway is sometimes we just have to listen to each other. Like like you just have to listen to the voices of these people, because I think their way of saying that martyrdom rather than oppression is rooted on their idea, rooted on their lived realities, that they are not being welcome in their own land, that they are actually treated as second class citizens in the country whom they call their home. And so the peace discourse has to continue, taking into consideration the vulnerability of this young, idealistic, passionate individuals, who can relate to the greater narrative of jihad, like that has been, and this very idea of jihad even is very, very contested, like, because I have my personal jihad, and my personal jihad is to relate to my country, wherein they will be able to understand why I wear the hijab, and why I pray 5 times a day, and why I actually don't eat pork, and all these things. And to be understood is my personal jihad. But I equally respect those who might as well say that, my death and martyrdom because this is the call of my religion. But when you listen to these people, they are kind, like they're just human beings. They just have to be given that avenue to express, what they are and who they are. And I think that to be reminded that they are also citizens, just like the rest of us. Thank you.
Maybe
Thank you
one,
very much. Yeah,
yeah,
you have an additional,
yeah,
Manuel.
just a very quick thought also in relation to this, and as a further reflection on interviewing Usman. I mean, like when we shot the interview, I felt incredibly sorry for him as well. And like one thing that I realized from this was how this aspect of martyrdom and violence at some point can also become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if his way of jihad is that he's proud of his son having died as a shaheed, then of course that has to mean that it was right, because otherwise the death of his son would have been senseless, and this is a cycle that we need to find ways to kind of to overcome. I obviously don't have the answer, but like this is something that lingered with me very much after we talked to him, and also after working on this film.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I don't think I can comment on the future of Marawi. I'd like for the Maranaos to be able to reclaim their narrative and forge their past. So I guess the film is there for people to watch and learn from. But in the end, we cannot impose our own perspective or belief on that matter. I think the Maranao should be given that voice.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I'd like to read the question of Brenda Barton. And she said, I have learned a lot having recently moved to the Philippines and came back yesterday from Cotabato. My question is, what did the characters featured in the film think about it after they saw it? What was their reaction
Hmm.
from the
Mm.
directors?
Yeah, we had Nancy in a few of the screenings, and that was very touching to see her, how she reacted to the film, and like she's still in the same situation. And a lot of this was very much complicated by COVID. So I don't know, Claire, do you know if the family already even had the chance to saw the film?
Yeah, I mailed the copies of the DVDs and CDs to Yusuf and Farhana and Nancy and Abdul. Of course, not Usman. It's very hard to find him, but uh, we have to consider that Farhana and Yusuf don't have DVD players. So initially, they haven't seen it. It's only Nancy who saw it, and Nancy, in the first screening that she was one of the reaction speakers, she actually cried, and when she saw herself in the film, and she felt like it was a way of amplifying her concerns. And so I think initially we wanted to screen this film first in Marawi, but the pandemic happened. It was supposed to be March last year, right, Manuel? So
Mm.
the pandemic happened, so Manuel had to leave for Germany, so everything fell through. So we still have plans to go back there if it's possible.
Oh yeah, thank you, Claire. We have another question, and it's quite technical. From Irene Remoto. She said, I would like to ask for the technicalities and process of documenting a film. How did you ask for consent from people in creating a documentary film? Did you ask them that the film will be distributed?
That's a really good question. Um, the for technical purposes, the common practice for documentary filmmakers is to ask for a consent form, release form before filming. But what we did was to ask for a consent first and then after, because we felt that it is really important that after the filming process, they would know what the film is about. I mean, we show them certain rushes, I mean, in the process, but not the entire film, of course, because it wasn't yet edited, but at least they would know what they're in, what the kind of film they are in. So it was really explained to them. Um, yes, we informed them that it will be distributed, so they are very aware uh, of of our intention. It's really
Yeah,
important to
thank
do
you.
that because I think, like, especially in Mindanao, there are so many individuals and organizations that felt, or communities that felt that they are being used for filmmakers and other organizations to further their visions and their careers. And I think, like, like especially when we talk about the lumad, right? So we were very careful about filming this when we were filming this documentary.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add, Manuel?
Um, no, I think that, like, I mean, this was because it was such a long process. We actually felt it would be unfair to ask for the release and consent first, and then just say, like, but look, you've signed this 2 years ago. So
Yeah.
it was very much a gradual process of trust building, and of, because I think we came back there like 5 or 6 times. So for us, this felt like a good process. Um, and yeah, we also didn't know what would happen. I mean, like Claire already said earlier, the story also changed. So it was more of a kind of, yeah, like a more of a organic growing and changing of the film as well. And it's our first long film, so it was a lot of learning by experience and learning by your own mistakes also. So thank you for still enjoying and discussing it. How much time? I
So
mean, we are technically over time,
there,
but there seems to be still
yeah,
quite a few questions. So
yeah. So would you like to have two more questions, or what do you
sure,
feel?
yeah,
What do
if
you think?
people
Two
still
more questions would be nice. If uh, if anyone would like to ask questions, and you can just unmute.
Kung Meron, obviously, yeah.
Yeah.
If there are questions, if there are more questions.
Reactions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No more.
Actually, if you will allow me to ask the question,
Sure, sure,
Yeah. Okay.
sure,
to Claire
Okay.
sure,
and
sir.
Manuel,
Okay.
I know Manuel did this program before, short films. I think it was called Short Films with a Long Reach, I think. And I
Yeah.
know Claire has this Stories from Beyond. Correct me if I'm getting the names wrong. But how would you connect this project with these efforts that you have maybe in relation to the larger context of Mindanao, because of course Marawi is a very particular story, and Yasmira pointed out that the issue in Marawi is very particular, right? It's not like the entire Mindanao, which people tend to mix up when they're not from Mindanao, right? So
Yeah,
I'd like to know how you would connect these previous efforts or ongoing efforts in relation to Mindanao in general.
yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I'll start, Manuel, and then you continue. I think that's a very good question, Patrick. After my time within the news, and then I studied abroad and came back, worked abroad and came back to the Philippines. I created Stories Beyond. It's an initiative that tries to tell restorative and transformative narratives of communities beyond the single story, and it's very connected to telling stories of communities that experience conflict, because not all, but most of the coverage of conflict, tragedies, and disasters always focused on numbers and casualties, but there is no long, I call it sustained inquiry after the fact. How communities try to rebuild, how communities show some form of resilience despite the tragedy. So the Marawi siege happened, it's not. Yes, it's true. It's not. It's just a small part of Mindanao, but it's also a very important city. It's one of it's an Islamic city. It's the oldest Islamic city in the Philippines. So when that happened, Manuel and I, we just shot a documentary before that on the Ati in Iloilo. So for Stories Beyond, it made sense that we are going to go back to go to Mindanao and shoot this film. So now that I'm based in Davao, we're still the Stories Beyond is still doing projects. So we have future projects that will still be about we have a future documentary that will still be out. It's still about Mindanao, and it's still within the vision of Stories Beyond.
Okay, Manuel, do you have any addition to what they said?
Uh, yeah, maybe just a short one. I mean, like obviously, I've also lived in Mindanao for a long time, and I have been fascinated by so many stories. And doing this film platform that Patrick mentioned was sort of my kind of first step into myself becoming a filmmaker as well, after working with several filmmakers from Mindanao. So I guess like one thing is that Mindanao is so kaleidoscopic, it's so multifaceted, there are so many stories, but a lot of these stories are also very universal. So for me as an outsider and as someone who has a very strong connection with the Philippines and Mindanao, but who is still German, the lens is a bit like, you know, these are incredibly important story, and then the question is like how can they be told in a way that also speaks outside. And I mean, Patrick, you mentioned this outsider insider perspective, and I guess that's something that Claire and I will keep doing in our future projects as well.
Yeah, okay. So we don't have any more questions. Yeah, so that's it. To
Uh,
close, we're going to close the period. It's already we're way past. Okay, Manuel,
Yes.
yeah.
do you have something to say?
No, I mean,
Okay.
it was great. Thank you for thank you for coming. I'll just paste our email addresses in the chat in case you would like to be in touch. We had some technical difficulties
Yeah,
for
okay.
some people who wanted to join. So a lot of people were actually outside the gates of the Zoom room because somehow there was an authentication problem. But I'm glad that like you guys all joined us, and I would really like to thank you, Patrick and Yasmira, for these two reactions, and you, Ami, for the moderation, and especially to all the questions and this really very intense and engaging discussions that we had. So I'll hand over to Claire for her.
Yes.
Yes.
For the last
Um,
word.
yes, thank you so much again, Mindanao Institute for Journalism and through Mindanews for agreeing to collaborate on this event with Stories Beyond. I hope that we will have a chance to collaborate again in the future. And congratulations on the anniversary. Thank you, Patrick, for saying yes to the invitation to react, and to Yasmira. If you're still around, I don't see you. Thank you so much for the, for the very thoughtful and really engaging reaction. Both of you really gave very insightful reactions to the film, and we look forward to really like think about it. Thank you to all the participants who watched the film, and ask really very important questions. For the suggestion to thank you for the suggestion to distribute it and really use it for also for peace education, and not just for film as entertainment, because for us documentary filmmakers, we have this vision that our film will transcend that space of the traditional cinema. And lastly, thank you so much, Cabusao, for agreeing to moderate this discussion.
You're
I
welcome.
yes, I hope in the future that if we get yes, there's the possible screening. Yes, we get more screening invites from all over the Philippines, not just in Mindanao. My dream for this film is to engage with the Visayan audiences as well, because Mindanao and the Visayas are very interconnected. And having taught in UP Iloilo, I realized that Panay is not aware of this, and there's so much interconnection there as well. And also in National Capital Region, and through Patrick, maybe in the future we can have another screening with the students from Diliman. So yes, thank you so much, and I hope to see you again soon for other screenings and discussions. Good night, everyone, and please stay safe. Okay, Ami, do you want to say the last word?
No, I just want to say thank you very much for coming, and we have here some Mindanews as people with us, and I'm glad you're here, Walter, Carol, Kitoy, and maybe a lot more. Thank you very much to all of you. We hope to see you in person in the next year or so. Thank you very much, and good
Oh my
night.
God. Yeah,
Okay,
let's
thank you
stay
so
optimistic.
much.
So
Yes,
I'm very
thank
thank
you.
you.
positive.
Ciao, ciao. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, May.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
I'll end it.
Bye bye.
Goodbye.